Hey, how's it going, everybody? Brad the Guitologist here. I want to do a quick video. Well, I'll say quick. This might end up stretching on for a little bit, but I want to do a video about the Event 21 simulation that was run last year in October. This simulation was sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation in part. Also, I think the World Economic Forum was involved, and the Johns Hopkins Medical Center was also involved. But what we're going to do is going to be kind of interesting. I'm going to go through, they actually, I don't know if you guys know this or if you've seen this, they have a website that you can go to, and I'll bring this up here. Let's see. It is actually centerforhealthsecurity.org/event201/videos.html. You can go here and you can see links to all the videos. They actually have a YouTube channel where they have published all these videos, and they live streamed this entire event back in October of last year. So this is something that was going on before the whole coronavirus pandemic thing was even thought of. They held this, and again, this was sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, among others. What I thought I would do here is go through each of these segments, possibly in different videos. This is a highlights reel, so we're going to skip this one because that's their highlights, not our highlights. We're more concerned with what we think are highlights. And we're going to go through these segments one by one. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different segments. So we'll start with number one. Number one, the first segment alone is 56 minutes long. So what I'm going to do is some skipping around. There are some introductions in the very beginning. It starts out with the lady from Johns Hopkins who was the host of the event.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anita Cicero, Deputy Director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. And today I will be your Master of Ceremonies for Event 201. On behalf of our center and our partners, the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our audience here in New York, as well as our larger virtual audience participating online today. The goal of the Event 201 exercise is to illustrate the potential consequences of a pandemic and the kinds of societal and economic challenges it would pose. The scenario also highlights the very critical role that global business and public-private...
She's just talking about, what the forum is about. It's essentially a simulation that they're going to be running, which will simulate what a global pandemic will look like in the 21st century, how politicians and business leaders will work together, and there are going to be a lot of things along the way that are going to sound very, almost eerily similar to what has been going on. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the first part that kind of really caught my attention, and that was the first time that I heard the phrase "new normal," and that is uttered by this man, Michael Ryan.
Distinguished guests, and thank you for this opportunity to
WHO's emergency program. So with that, we'll turn to a video.
Dr. Michael Ryan, Executive Director of the WHO.
Greetings, distinguished guests, and thank you for this opportunity to say a few words at this year's Event 201, the high-level simulation exercise for pandemic preparedness and response, hosted by Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, the World Economic Forum, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Okay, so what's interesting, I just want to drive this home to any of you who are, if you're not familiar with simulations, and what they really mean when you have something like a false flag event that happens, or some kind of false emergency event. There are many instances in the past where simulations have actually been held in during actual crises that basically acted as cover for the crisis itself. A couple of examples are the simulations that were being run during 9/11 by the pilots of NORAD. They were running simulations on exactly what was going on that day, just weirdly enough, that some planes had been hijacked and they were going to crash into certain things, and that basically NORAD was running a drill or a simulation of exactly what was going on the day it was happening. The same thing happened during the 7/7 bombings in London. And again, this is something you would have had to have seen elsewhere in order to follow this, and why this is important, why this concept of simulations is important when you're talking about false flag events or fake crises like what we're seeing right now. If we skip ahead to 9 minutes and 38 seconds, we'll just let this guy talk for a little bit longer. You'll see what I mean. He actually mentions the term new.
Unfortunately, I was not able to join you today. I'm involved in the IHR Emergency Committee for Ebola, but I had hoped to be in the room with you, because the issues you will be dealing with over the next hours may be tabletop exercises today, but they address real and critical threats which we at WHO take very seriously. Without a question, epidemic risk has become a global strategic concern. I don't think we've ever been in a situation where we have had to respond to so many health emergencies at once. This is a new normal. I don't expect the frequency of these epidemics to reduce, and in fact, vulnerabilities all over the world, developed and developing countries, have increased, not decreased.
So why would that be the case? Why would you expect over thousands and thousands of years of human history for these things to increase and not decrease? Because if you think about it, we have had a form of globalization now for over 500 years, since Columbus essentially discovered, or I say discovered, but opened up the New World to European trade. I think we can definitely make that distinction about Columbus. He did open up the New World to European trade. He did introduce smallpox onto the and other diseases onto the Native Americans on this continent. And I'm sure some diseases went back with him to Europe that had not been there before. So, and we never talk much about that, some diseases that might have made their way backwards, but I'm sure some did. But we have had a system of more or less globalization since then. We've had trade to the Far East. We've had connected societies all over the world ever since. So to this idea that just because globalization has increased and that we can jump on a plane and be anywhere in the world, that the frequency of pandemic-type disasters would rear their ugly heads with greater frequency, to me sounds a little bit suspect. Now, again, I'm not an epidemiologist, so I don't claim to know everything there is about epidemics or how they're spawned or none of that stuff. But knowing a little bit about world history, it does seem a bit suspect that this argument would be made that this would have to be some kind of new normal. And why is it that we are having all of these events or all these new bugs starting to skip into the human population that were theretofore only found in animals, for instance, unless there's some kind of meddling being done by governments or by even rogue actors in different countries, trying to scare people, trying to create the need for a new drug that they just happen to possess. Whatever the case is, I am of the mind that we are probably seeing something more like that than we are some kind of natural rearing of Mother Nature's ugly head into pandemics, considering the long history we have of being a global community. So next thing I want to show you, see if you skip ahead a little bit. Now, I can show you all of this, but I would encourage you instead to go watch this, because there's some moments in here that, man, are just extremely freaky. I want to skip past this guy to the point where we start actually talking about the event itself. So I'm going to let this guy take it away, and we will learn about CAPS, which is what they're calling the simulated virus. The virus is a simulated coronavirus associated pulmonary syndrome, or CAPS.
And our thanks to Dr. Ryan. And with that, here in New York and online, welcome to Event 201.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick.
So this is their simulation.
Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. At first, the spread was limited to those with close contacts, healthcare personnel, co-workers, and families. But now, it's spreading rapidly throughout local communities. International travel has turned local epidemics into a pandemic spanning the globe. Just 3 months ago, CAPS started in South America, but has now reached several countries with more than 30,000 cases and nearly 2,000 deaths.
Okay, so what's interesting here, if you kind of do the numbers, if you knock the 3 zeros off there, you'll see that 2 in 30 people die from this. So that's what, if you extrapolate that out, that's about what, 6% or so? And isn't that what we were almost exactly told, that this virus was killing people at? The rate at which it was killing people was about 6% early on, 3.4 to 6%. Those were the numbers I was hearing. So interesting that the death rate is almost bang on target. Also, if you notice the places where this virus migrates, one of them is the U.S. Obviously, you have to involve the U.S., so all the money gets involved. China is the other big one. You have to involve China, so the money gets involved. The other one is a small, out-of-the-way country in Europe, Portugal. Now, I say small, out of the way. I don't mean that Portugal is. I would put Portugal on the same economics scale as Italy in terms of its strategic industrial importance to the EU. Okay, so if you think about it in those terms, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Italy, Greece, these are all countries in the EU that have been struggling in recent years and decades, and have never really been the tip top of the EU in terms of in industrial production or anything like that. They're not in the tops in banking or any other thing like that either. They're kind of second tier country in terms of the EU. So it's interesting that it made its way to Portugal. I just wanted to make note of that. But check this out. Keep watching.
Good morning, and thank you all for being part of this pandemic emergency board.
So this guy's from Johns Hopkins University.
We're at the start of what's looking like it
right
will
next
be
to
a
him is from
severe
Bill Melinda
pandemic.
Gates Foundation.
And there are problems emerging that can only be solved by global business and governments working together. The global community has been working to respond to this pandemic since its recognition, but as health and economic impacts have become more severe, the World Economic Forum has convened this board because of your combined expertise, your backgrounds, and your global voice. We will need all of you to help us respond to urgent policy crises that are emerging.
We will need all of you to help us respond. So what I have surmised that this was about, that this little simulation was about, and bringing all these people together from all these different organizations was, first of all, to get them so that they could share ideas sort of in private in the back halls, some of them. Also, the ones who wouldn't necessarily be 100% on board from the get-go, they are encouraging those people to be on board with an epidemic that pops up within the next I don't know, month from this point, because they held this in October about a coronavirus. They're calling it a CAPS, coronavirus associated pulmonary syndrome. They could have just as easily called COVID-19 this. I guess they just didn't want to be that obvious. But it seems to me that they held this simulation to get these people on board with what they needed to do and get them in lockstep with what they would be needing to do during the actual pandemic that was to come. It looks that way to me. Johns Hopkins University and Medical Center, if you guys don't know, if you're outside the U.S., they're real close to D.C., so like for instance, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, when she has her surgeries or she goes to the hospital, she's in Johns Hopkins University Hospital. Anybody else, politician-wise, who goes to the hospital, they're most likely going to Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins pretty much has its fingers in just about everything in terms of medical, political, meetings of the mind. So I mean, they're pretty much right there. Anything having to do with Food and Drug Administration stuff, they're always kind of brought in to testify to Congress. Representatives from Johns Hopkins are always testifying to Congress. So because they're so close, that then this gives you some background as to who this guy is, and also who the Master of Ceremonies was. The lady, I think she's the president of Johns Hopkins.
Emerging. The purpose of this board is to advise leaders in national governments, global business, and international organizations on the response to the pandemic, particularly focused on international problems that require collaboration between business and government. Your recommendations will be critical and will be promulgated and communicated broadly at the end of this meeting. On the left screen, as we have this meeting, you will find a dashboard of information about the pandemic that will help us in our conversations. As important background for this discussion, we want to start the meeting by viewing this news story that just aired on Global News Network.
Here's where it gets really tricky.
Continuing our coverage of the newly discovered CAPS disease and the scope of its deadly outbreaks. There are now more than 30,000 reported cases. Experts warn this may be just the beginning of a global problem. GNN science reporters have produced a video about what we know so far about CAPS, the virus, the outbreak, and the resulting chaos.
CAPS is a novel coronavirus related to those viruses that caused the frightening SARS epidemic in
So this. Let me pause right here for 1 second. So what you're seeing right here is a simulated newscast that was prepared beforehand for just this event, Event 201, for this roundtable discussion. They didn't have to produce a video to this degree or to this level of competence. They didn't have to go all out in the production here, but they've actually gone all out in the production of this video, I guess to make it seem more real to the participants. But why would you do that if it's only a simulation and if everybody understands it's just a simulation? Why would you go to this level to produce such a video? It just doesn't make a whole hell of a lot of sense. But yeah, continue watching this. You're going to see what I mean when I say that this just gets kind of creepy.
2003 and the deadly MERS outbreaks in recent years. Scientists think each infected person in turn infects on average 2 more people. This disease is proving more transmissible than SARS or MERS and about as contagious as influenza. Essentially, the cumulative number of cases is doubling every week. At this rate, we can expect to see 16 times as many cases in a month.
Okay, so doubling it every week, 16 times as many cases in a month. So you're seeing right there the parabolic curve that they more or less predict with these sorts of pandemics.
Unless we find a way to interrupt transmission. The virus appears to be spreading rapidly in densely populated and impoverished neighborhoods in some megacities in South America. CAPS is a serious respiratory disease.
So they've moved the central location or the outbreak site from China in the real case to South America in the simulated case. The simulation centered around, like they said, dense urban areas, and that's exactly where it pretty much sprang up in real life. And the difference there is that it came from a bat instead of a pig.
More than half of the recognized cases have required hospital care, creating a huge strain on healthcare systems. The fatality rate is about 10%. For comparison, CAPS is about as lethal as SARS. And
okay, so they're saying here that the fatality rate is 10%, but that really doesn't even jive with their own numbers that they had earlier, which is interesting because anybody who actually does the math even in their own head knows that 2,000 deaths out of 30,000 patients doesn't equal 10%. So already this, and nobody even brings this up. Nobody on the panel at all brings up the disparity between the numbers. They're calling it 10% kill rate, but their own numbers says that it's not 10%, and nobody brings it up, which I think is very telling. It's almost as if the numbers just go right over their heads, or maybe if they are paying attention, maybe they're just too mousy to speak up about it. Why the discrepancy?
2 to 4 times more lethal than the 1918 influenza pandemic, the worst pandemic on record. Even so, some people only exhibit mild flu-like symptoms, not requiring treatment in a hospital. Alarmingly, those people are able to walk around and spread the virus, not realizing they are doing so. Even worse, international travelers have been arriving at their destinations symptom-free, but within a matter of hours, becoming ill. Travel-related cases have blossomed into outbreaks in a number of locations.
So right there, it's interesting that they give you a picture of a boat. Now, every time I pause this thing is going to pop up. I wish it wouldn't do that. But isn't it interesting that they give you a picture of a boat when they're talking about travel-related deaths? That they focus in on the boat, and you see a lot of people going to board this boat, and some of the early problems that we had with the spread was, supposedly due to cruise lines.
And have quickly grown faster than health authorities could respond and contain them. In other places, physicians have quickly recognized the symptoms of CAPS and have been able to isolate infected individuals and avoid an outbreak, for now. Global public health experts are very concerned about this disease because it appears the virus is readily transmitted through the air from person to person. Essentially, all people are susceptible. Experts agree unless it is quickly controlled, it could lead to a severe pandemic, an outbreak that circles the globe and affects people everywhere. Models developed by leading public health authorities indicate a CAPS pandemic could lead to an outcome worse than the 1918 influenza, which killed 50 to 100 million people worldwide. Given the global population is 4 times larger than it was in 1918, if these models prove accurate, we could be looking at hundreds of millions of deaths over the next year or two.
And of course, if you'll recall, early on during this pandemic, just about all anyone could talk about and still talk about is the comparison to the 1918 Spanish flu.
Okay, now we're going to get a briefing on the numbers and distribution of cases by Dr. Caitlin Rivers.
As you've just heard, the outbreak is very worrisome. The vast majority of cases are occurring in Brazil and other South.
Another thing I wanted to mention there is that at 1837 on the timestamp, some people were only experiencing mild symptoms. So that's also the case with the real deal.
American countries. However, as you can see on the screen, there have been some spread to Portugal, the continental United States, and mainland China. Our models project that with continued spread in Latin America and predicted spread to additional countries, we could be looking at double the number of cases in 1 week and 16 times as many in a month if we are not able to stop the spread. That would be on the order of 500,000 cases, and it would continue to rise exponentially. In 3 months, we could be approaching 10 million cases. We are also tracking financial markets as an indicator of the economic impacts of caps. While markets are down worldwide in the past couple of weeks, they are still positive for the year.
So far.
Thank you, Dr. Rivers. The first emerging policy crisis for which we need this board's recommendations regards global allocation and distribution of medical countermeasures. And by medical countermeasures, we mean vaccines, drugs, and diagnostics and other medical supplies to help us combat the CAPS pandemic. I know we would all agree that if we had a vaccine in hand for CAPS, it'd be a game changer. But leading vaccine experts say a vaccine in the near term is highly unlikely. But there is an antiviral that does look like it will work. And to understand that better, we're going to watch one more clip here.
Okay, this is interesting. Okay, this clip that they're about to play here is extremely interesting. If you guys have followed the hydroxychloroquine thing and also, the remdesivir thing more recently that Fauci is actually promoting now. Dr. Fauci in the beginning, he kind of slapped Trump and called his hydroxychloroquine anecdotal in its efficacy. So already you knew where this guy stood. He'd stood against this drug. Trump, for whatever reason you want to say, it doesn't matter what the reasons are, really. We suspect that there could be underlying reasons why both of these guys are pushing this drug over this one, and Fauci comes back and pushes remdesivir over the other one. We'll see later why Fauci might be pushing the remdesivir, but I thought this was exceptionally interesting. Check this shit. Another fake newscast.
Continuing our CAPS disease coverage and possible solutions, I'm joined by immunologist Dr. Yvonne Bello and Dr. Rhea Blakey, an epidemiologist, both highly respected in their fields. Let's get right to it. Why are people saying a vaccine for the CAPS virus is not likely in the near term?
Researchers are working on a vaccine, and we have viable leads, but it's complicated. We have known about CAPS-like viruses in animals and people for decades, but have not been successful at developing a licensed vaccine. And sure, there are new technologies that may help, but it's going to be difficult. I am not optimistic about having a vaccine in time to be relevant during this pandemic. Even if we discover a good vaccine candidate, we're starting from scratch, and it takes time to test safety and efficacy, typically years. So even if testing moves quickly, global manufacturing will still need to be established.
So you could see this as establishing cover for why a vaccine would be taking so long. You could see it as establishing expectations for a vaccine not being likely to help early on. But it's interesting that, again, we're going to come back to remdesivir in a minute because that is one of the HIV drugs that has shown some efficacy at treating coronavirus, but not. But the funny thing is, it's not even as effective in patients as hydroxychloroquine has proven to be. But remdesivir costs a lot more than hydroxychloroquine. And if you follow the money, Gilead, and if you follow the study that they actually were able to develop that drug under, they received $37.5 million. And I will show you. Right here, Forbes. And this guy's actually, this guy, John Lamatina, is actually, he's Big Pharma himself. He comes from Big Pharma, and he does writing for Forbes on the side, I guess. But he's actually standing behind Gilead Drugs here because he's trying to head off efforts by some people to criticize Gilead for developing this drug with, in part, $37.5 million that it received from taxpayers, from the NIH, of all places, the National Institute of Health. And who runs the National Institute of Health? Dr. Fauci. So, interesting bedfellows there. Dr. Fauci's National Institute of Health gives Gilead $37.5 million to develop remdesivir. They do it, and now Fauci is promoting remdesivir as a killer of this COVID-19. So interesting. And even Robert Reich, who's not on the right by any means, has come out in a tweet and criticized this. He said on May the 2nd, as Gilead's stock price rises on reports of remdesivir, remember that the drug was developed with a $37.5 million grant from the federal government, more specifically NIH, paid for by taxpayers. Once again, Big Pharma is set to profit on the taxpayers' dime, and I have to agree with Robert on this one. One of the times I've agreed with Robert over the years. I don't agree with him on a whole lot, but I do agree with him on this. Seems shady, doesn't it? So I will put links down in the description to anything I share here. I'll put links down so you could check it out for yourself if you want. If you feel so inclined, definitely do that. Think for yourself. Don't listen to me. Go look all this up for yourself. But usually in cases like this, if you follow the money, you figure out what's what, and you figure out what's going on. Now, for full disclosure, other people have pointed out that President Trump had some, let's see. That President Trump had some financial interest in hydroxychloroquine, but it was minor. I don't think it was very much money, but he had some interest, according to the New York Times. And it's interesting, when you see this background that he has his small financial interest in hydroxychloroquine, which actually has efficacy. And actually, I will show you why I think it's for real, because one of the guys that's actually on the panel of this simulation, he used to work for Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, and Brigham and Women's Hospital actually even says that hydroxychloroquine has efficacy, and they include it in their protocols for this virus. So interesting stuff. Again, you guys can click down below and see all this stuff for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. But let's get back to this event. Crazy stuff.
Again, multiple hurdles.
We simply cannot rely on these old timelines and processes. This is a crisis. We have to move beyond these issues. It may be complicated, difficult, but if we dedicate all available resources, this can happen. Also, keep in mind, we need effective treatments sooner rather than later. Extronavir is an antiviral drug. Scientists have told me this could be effective. We need to start treating people immediately.
Okay. You've seen right here all the media back and forth that has taken place with hydroxychloroquine, with one side saying it's effective, one side saying it's not effective, and you've got these people arguing in public over its efficacy. That is basically taking place within this simulation between these two doctors, and you can see one has the one stance and the other has the other stance. One is promoting, is saying that vaccines are going to take 2 years, while the other one's saying, well, if we put all of our resources and we put our backs into it, we could get it done quicker, and I think that is basically training politicians to sign off on any check that they are asked to sign off on that will get us a vaccine quicker, according to the vaccine manufacturers. So I think that's kind of training in itself, but notice the name of the drug that they chose for this simulation. Extronavir, which is an HIV drug in the simulation. Okay, so it's not a real one. It's a fictitious drug, Extronavir. Shares a lot in common with remdesivir, does it not? Remdesivir, Extronavir, HIV medication. Very interesting, right? And then you've got these two doctors going at it in this simulated news report that was made only for the benefit of these few people that happen to be at this simulation.
While I agree Extranavir does look promising, it's currently used for treating HIV. However, it's not manufactured on the scale needed for treating this many people. And will we just stop using it for HIV treatment? How will we get this drug in the quantities needed?
Okay, so he brings up the argument, oh, we're just going to stop treating the people with HIV. Well, the same arguments were made against malaria and lupus and all the stuff for hydroxychloroquine. But those same arguments aren't really being made, interestingly enough, now for remdesivir, if you'll notice. Just because Dr. Fauci recommended it, and they've already basically painted themselves into a corner. The media, on the one hand, they're against everything that Trump does. So you have these two polar opposites, and they are enemies. So the enemy of my enemy must be my friend, right? From both perspectives. So you've got Dr. Fauci and Trump, who are enemies on the hydroxychloroquine front, at least, and so they spar publicly over that, or at least Fauci kind of made him look bad in public in front of millions of people when he said what he said. So the media takes him and says, oh, he must be our hero. And who knows if this was all planned or not beforehand, but I suspect it probably was, and that Dr. Fauci and the media that sat around this same table. If you'll notice, the media is actually at this event. NBC executive is at this event, and you'll see him later, I'm sure, but I've only gotten so far, and I haven't seen him yet, but there are actually media representatives at this event. It's almost like a Bilderberger group or something, where you have people from industry, media, politics, all the major players together in the same goddamn room, essentially plotting what's going to happen next. That's exactly what you're seeing right here.
Who decides who has priority for the limited amounts we do have? We both know countries are hoarding Extranavir.
Doctor, in my opinion, you are lost in the details. With enough money and political will, anything is possible.
Money and
Let's
political
get going
will.
on this now.
All we need is money and political will, isn't that right? All we need is money. Open up the checkbooks, open up the treasuries, and just pour money at it, right? And that's going to solve the problems. So the one doctor raises the problem, oh, we just don't have the capacity for to treat the people who are already on this drug, and also to treat all these new people who might also need this drug. And then she comes up with the solution. Well, just open up the checkbooks, right? Let's just rob the treasuries, which is exactly what we're seeing now.
Thank you both for this extremely important discussion. Our U.S. affiliate has just released polling results on public expectations for a vaccine. A majority of Americans expect a vaccine to be available within 2 months, and 65% of those polled are eager to take the vaccine, even if it's experimental. In related news, a significant...
I mean, and where did they get... Why would you even include that number, that imaginary number? Because you don't know what a real poll would show with regard to how many Americans would accept a vaccine, even if it was experimental. Surely they don't really have that number, do they? And if they do, where the hell did they get it? Was it just pulled out of their asses? And furthermore, what's the purpose of even including it in this simulation? It's just, the whole thing raises to me red flags that this simulation event, this event 201, was designed to get everybody on board, to get everybody from all these various institutions on the same page, to basically scare them into being on the same page. If you don't listen, if you don't go along with this whole COVID-19 thing, if you don't get on board with it and go and follow the steps, if you don't just follow these steps, like we did in the simulation, 60 million people are going to end up dying. And I think that's what, eventually, that's what happens with this simulation. I think like 60 million people worldwide end up dying from this. And so, you know, they're going to have that in the back of their minds, aren't they? Going forward, within the next few months, they're going to say, hell, I remember that damn simulation from last year. It wasn't even that long ago. 60 million people died. Wow. And it was the same sort of thing. Man, holy shit. I can't believe it. We better really get on board with all these steps, shouldn't we? And we need to take those extra steps that we didn't take in the simulation, even. You know what I mean? This shit's eerie. I don't know about you guys, but this is eerie as shit.
And demand for personal protective equipment like N95 masks and gloves are on the rise due to the pandemic. However, globally, hospitals are running low. Additionally, other critical medical supplies such as saline and antibiotics are dwindling.
Okay, so you know, again, here we go with N95 masks and gloves. You know, that's been one of the biggest stories of this. N95 masks and gloves. N95 masks and gloves. We mainly the masks. We heard about masks for so long. You know, you had all these people getting into it from home, and everybody making them, and you know, housewives sitting around doing it, and it, you know, it's a feel good thing. They're just doing it to basically make themselves feel better, and if they're part of it, you know, and it's just interesting that they, you know, the simulation has also simulated that.
Countries and companies are reportedly stockpiling supplies, disrupting healthcare supply chains, causing dangerous shortages in.
Same thing. They accuse China of doing that. They accuse China actually of going around and buying up masks in other places and shipping them back home. If you'll recall, also there were some issues with 3M selling to foreign countries before supplying states in the U.S. You remember stuff like that, and Trump had to crack down. That's part of the simulation as well. How far does government go in cracking down on and whipping the industrialists into shape and taking over production? This is all part of this simulation, every single bit of this.
In many parts of the world.
And finally, for the latest information on what we know about vaccines and this antiviral, here's medical countermeasure expert Matt Watson.
As we've just heard, there is no existing vaccine that appears effective against the newly discovered CAPS virus. Governments, scientists, and companies around the world have become working intensively to develop one, but it's highly unlikely that a vaccine could be developed, tested, manufactured, and distributed in less than a year, and it's likely to take much longer. While there have been efforts to develop vaccines against SARS and MERS coronaviruses, none have been licensed. And given the distinctions in the CAPS virus, vaccines against those diseases would not be effective for CAPS. The antiviral drug Extranavir has demonstrated some efficacy against the CAPS virus. It reduces the severity of illness and saves lives in those who are infected, but does not prevent infection like a vaccine would. Extranavir is a generic drug primarily used to treat HIV. It is manufactured in 5 countries, including the United States and China. Approximately 1 million.
Okay. Let's look at remdesivir. Where is it manufactured? Remdesivir manufacturing. Okay. Country. Where is it manufactured? Okay, Gilead is the manufacturer, but where do they make it? Okay, here news stories where they're expanding the global supply. Let me see. Let's see. How much you want to bet that it's 5 countries? I'm just guessing. It might be 5 countries. It's not going to be on that page. Hang on. We'll find it. Look at this. Since January, Gilead has invested significant capital to establish a supply chain capable of large-scale production of remdesivir. They started this back in January before it even hit the U.S. Before it was even... I mean, really? They've been doing this since January? How interesting is that? Manufacturing. Let's see. Where is it manufactured? Let's see. Where is it manufactured? We have supplemented our internal manufacturing with significant additional capacity from multiple manufacturing partners in North America, Europe, and Asia. So North America, Europe, and Asia, and then them. So at least 4. So anyway, you get the idea. Pretty similar, right? Almost eerily so.
Million people take Extranavir every day for HIV. If all of those HIV patients could be switched to other antiretroviral drugs, we could potentially free up enough Extranavir to treat 26 million CAPS patients. Assuming further that we could double production over the course of a year by bringing additional manufacturing online, we could eventually have 52 million treatment courses per year, but it will take many months to get there. And there is not likely ever to be enough to keep up with the need as long as the disease continues to spread at this accelerating rate. Experts agree that while many lives will be saved by this antiviral, it is not going to slow the pandemic in the same way a vaccine could if we had one available. However, we do have the potential capacity to save many people. Now the question is, how do we distribute the supplies we have? Existing global supply chains and logistics networks for Extranavir run efficiently under normal conditions, but the pandemic is likely to be very different. We are hearing that one country where Extranavir is produced is planning to block some or all of the export of this medicine to hold on to it for their own people. Tensions are rising between governments and pharmaceutical and medical supply companies about how supplies should be allocated and who gets to make those decisions.
It's almost like
international humanitarian organizations are raising serious concerns.
I figured out what's creeping me out about this. It's almost like Dungeons and Dragons for international elitist psychopaths, isn't it? It's like you have these psychopaths in a room playing Dungeons and Dragons where the pieces on the board and the concepts are something from the real world.
About access to antivirals for people in low and middle income countries. In addition to antivirals, other medical supplies are not reaching those who need them in many parts of the world. This is especially pronounced in low and middle income countries, which are reporting the highest rates of disease transmission and mortality. In part, this is due to last-minute stockpiling and hoarding by customers, and in part, it is due to cost and logistics issues. Personal protective equipment, such as N95 respirators, are in critically short supply in some areas. N95 respirators are manufactured by many companies around the world, but there are no reliable estimates of how many are produced or what global production surge capacity is. All we can say is that production capacity covers normal demand, and it is not uncommon to have temporary shortages during severe flu seasons. In a severe pandemic, we can expect the need to increase by a factor of at least 2 to 3.
So again, we've got the masks. They've hit every high point of this entire scare. They've hit every single high point. They've got the masks. They've got the remdesivir drug that's coming in. The only thing really they didn't count on was the hydroxychloroquine, which is what Trump kind of just got up there and spouted off, because that was independently developed and he just happened to give it a boost because he mentioned it. And I don't think they accounted for that. They didn't see that one coming, but Fauci had to step in basically and put the script back. Right. if you notice, and rewind it and watch the Fauci segment again where he does that, and just look at it. Look at the way he does it. It's just, he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly the conflict that's going to present when he basically contradicts the president, in front of millions of people, that what you're talking about is just anecdotal evidence, as if remdesivir isn't also anecdotal at this point. You know what I mean? That's all it is. It's all anecdotal. Any evidence is going to be anecdotal. Technically, he's correct, but the way that he said it, the way that he basically slapped down any semblance of hope in this drug, or people pinning their hopes on this drug, it's as if it went off script for a second. He had to get it back on script, and that's exactly what he was there for, is to keep the script. And this is the script.
Given these supply issues, there are a number of potential proposals being floated aimed at coordinating and facilitating medical countermeasure allocation and delivery around the world. Politicians, business leaders, scientists, and policymakers are weighing in. Some are suggesting that suppliers and buyers continue to work independently to decide where to send antivirals and medical supplies. Others are suggesting that countries where these products are made should be able to decide where those drugs and supplies go. Still others are recommending that suppliers, buyers, and countries entrust a central international entity or organization with the job of allocation and distribution decisions for at least a portion of antivirals and other medical supplies.
Are you starting to get the picture now? Are you starting to see what this is all about? Are you starting to see what they want out of all this? It's all back to the same. It's New World Order. It's world government. It's all the same bullshit. It's all the same bullshit. But just in this case, they're using a fake pandemic to get us there.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. So the policy crisis in question for this board in this meeting is this: how should governments, business, and international organizations allocate and distribute pandemic antivirals and medical supplies to the people who need the most?
Okay, so you notice, every one of these people who are part of the hosting, they're either reading from teleprompters or they're reading from, paperwork that they have in front of them. Well, who issued this paperwork? Who wrote all this? Who wrote this exercise? Who wrote the words? I'd like to know who wrote down the words, who typed them out, that this guy is reading, and under whose direction did they do that? I know Johns Hopkins is the one hosting the event, but again, you have the World Economic Forum involved, and also the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So, who wrote the words? That would be the interesting thing to know, wouldn't it?
We now have time for discussion about this matter. This is the focus of this meeting.
And everybody's afraid to chime in. Watch this. Everybody just waits to be called upon.
Any reactions? We have too few antivirals for the needs that we have, and we're projecting to have increasing needs. So should we let normal suppliers and buyers manage the distribution and allocation of this medication?
And see, nobody wants to be wrong. Nobody wants to say the wrong thing. And this exactly what happened in the real world. Everybody just kind of waited around, more or less, the leadership at least, and just waited to see what others were going to say before they actually took a stand and said anything. That's kind of what happens here. And this guy ends up having to call on somebody from the CDC.
Should government step in? If so, with what rules?
It's like a teacher, like anybody.
Steve?
Yeah, let me start by saying it is fantastic how much has been learned about this disease in just the short period of time since its discovery.
Oh, he's well into it. He's playing the part.
I think one issue that hasn't yet been explored is what could be done to suppress transmission apart from the use of countermeasures. And so I think that's something that needs to be an active area of study. Learning where transmission is occurring would be helpful in order to implement measures that don't require medicines to suppress transmission. Maybe hospital settings, school settings are places where transmission could be occurring. With regards to the question of sharing.
So right off the bat, before he even answered the question at hand, he wanted to dive into basically what he was saying there is keep people at home, lock it down. He was talking about lockdowns months before the actual lockdowns, right there. And he actually moved the conversation toward lockdowns before he addressed the first question that they had on the table. He wanted to try to mitigate things, but what we ended up calling flatten the curve. That's what he was talking about right there.
Bring this scarce resource. We do have some models that I think could be built upon. The PIP framework, the things that were done during H1N1.
Okay, the PIT framework that he's talking about right there, that comes from the University of Pittsburgh, I believe. Yes, University of Pittsburgh. It's also called the FRED framework for reconstructing epidemiological dynamics. And you can read through this as well. This is actually, you see right over here, a licensing manager, Jeffrey Depp, licensing manager, technology licensing manager. This is a technology, this is a modeling software, essentially, that the University of Pittsburgh just happens to license out, and who knows how much money they make on a license. But if you look right over here, you can see some of the things that the license has gone to in the past. This CAPS is not the CAPS that they're talking about here. This is actually this is something else. This is a study for, because I already looked at this. This was a study for circadian rhythm abnormalities. But it's interesting to me that this FRED framework was brought up, because if you scroll down and if you look into who developed this FRED framework, this is not that old. This framework, or this modeling software, or whatever this is that they have, it's not that old. November 2017, it looks like, was when they developed a fully functional web-based user interface for FRED. Was submitted to Innovation Institute on May 22nd, 2017. Notable mentions: funded by the Midas, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. You guys who watch NPR a lot, they also, you hear Robert Wood Johnson all the time after just about every segment. Well, Robert Wood Johnson is one of the Johnsons from Johnson & Johnson. Interesting thing about this, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation funding the same FRED framework that it gets brought up in this Event 201, is that Johnson & Johnson and Microsoft happen to be the only two AAA-rated companies in the United States as of this date. Johnson & Johnson and Microsoft are the only two AAA-rated ones. They are actually higher rated. They have a higher rating for their debt than the U.S. government. Microsoft and Johnson & Johnson. What does that say? That says that investors see their money as being safer in Microsoft or Johnson & Johnson than they do in U.S. bonds. So, the Treasury bonds. So what does that mean? That means investors know something that the common person probably doesn't. They know that these people have their hands in just about everything, not just in American society, but internationally. They have fingers in lots of different pies, and no matter which levers get pushed, no matter which thing happens, no matter which unforeseen thing happens, even if an asteroid hits the Earth and we didn't know about it, they're probably going to be okay. They're going to be like the cockroaches at the end of everything. You're going to have Microsoft and Johnson & Johnson officials basically running around directing things instead of governments. So that should tell you something right there. Really profound. But let's go on with what this CDC guy has to say.
to share vaccine. I think each of those models should be explored as ways of some sort of distribution process. One of the specific things that was done during H1N1 was to examine the critical individuals in countries as a sort of a minimum level of countermeasure that would be needed, and to
So do you mean critical infrastructure?
Exactly.
Critical infrastructure
right.
in countries going?
Security,
Okay.
police, fire. What number of treatment courses? If we had enough to share,
Okay.
what would that minimum number be, just as a starting point for negotiation?
Great. Adrian? And then
I think before we agree that we have a finite resource, we need to really challenge ourselves on the vaccine production. We've seen historically that we can actually produce an Ebola vaccine in a year.
Adrian
it requires
Thomas of Johnson & Johnson talking about vaccines. And yeah, historically, we've seen that we can produce an Ebola vaccine in a year because we already fucking had it, basically sitting on the shelf waiting for the day whenever it arrived in the U.S. and people were, desperate for it. And not to mention the fact that we probably are the ones who started the fucking whole Ebola scare to begin with. But, Johnson & Johnson, ladies and gentlemen.
Flexibility on the regulatory side. It requires commitment from companies. But I do think that before we say that a vaccine is not available, we should not slow down on that. We should pursue that. And I think similarly, we need to explore how could we accelerate production of our antivirals. We've seen it happen before in the HIV crisis. It's possible, but decisions need to be made, and we need to bring the right people together to do that.
Okay. And for the moment, before we are able to accelerate production of the antiviral, do you have any initial reaction, since you are potentially one of the companies that could be part of this deliberation?
Yeah, you could be part
What
of
we've seen work very well in the HIV field is, in fact, procurement through the Global Fund. So having a centralized mechanism, so financially able to procure on behalf of affected countries would be critical. I think the second thing is
financially able to procure on behalf of affected countries. So what he's saying is basically give us the purse strings so that we can buy the materials and things that we need to make the vaccine a reality. And we will basically, just trust us with the purse strings, and we'll do what needs to get done quicker that way. Essentially, that's what it sounded like to me he was saying.
It's going to be very important that for the business sector, for manufacturers of antivirals, that we have clarity around what the need is and where the need is and who are making the decisions.
So who's deciding on where they're going? Okay.
So can I add to that?
Yes.
So one of the challenges we have is what to do in the really short term about the supply of vaccines, antivirals, etc., because low to middle income countries will be concerned.
Hang on a second. Who's this lady? Jane Halton of ANZ Bank Group. Let's look her up. Jane Halton. It's always interesting to see who comes up as well. Like if you say Jane, Halt, there she is. Australian public servant, Jane Halton. But it said Bank Group. What was that? ANZ Bank Group. Okay, she's a member of the board of ANZ Bank. But it also said that, let's see, Clayton UTZ, the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and the U.S. Institute. What? The U.S. Why would she be on the board of some U.S. institute if she's Australian? What does that mean? Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation. So she's Australian, and yet she's on the board of this. She's the chairman of the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, which, and any innovations just means money. CODA. Vault System. Her 33-year career in the Australian Public Service included 15 as Secretary of the Department of Finance and Secretary of the Department of Health and Aging. Previously, she was the Executive Coordinator, Deputy Secretary of the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. Extensive experience in health policy and delivery. Delivery of the Australian government budget, of course. You have the purse strings on the one hand and the health shit on the other hand. Seems like a lot of these people are in those positions. And the management and performance of Australian government agencies. If she's so closely tied to Australian government agencies, I mean, I get that Australia is obviously a business partner as well as an ally, but if she is so closely, basically, she's a patriot for Australia, why would she be on this U.S. Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation? Ms. Halton has held a number of significant roles in global health governance, including chair of the board of the World Health Organization. So she's the former chairman of the board for the WHO, president of the World Health Assembly, and chair of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Okay. Well, interesting. Very interesting.
Concerned that the entire supply chain will be tied up by the time they can even figure out how to finance their purchases. We know, and we know this from what happened with H1N1, that if you can stop something early in terms of everything from ring fencing in particular countries, but also to look at the transmission from country to country, and there's a variety of measures that can be taken to do that, but unless that is done in a global context and it's done very early, we will end up with a situation where the entire supply chain will have gone. So what we need to do at the very outset is figure out what
the Chinese guy was like, I'll stick that under my hat for later, perhaps. The guy right next to her, he's a representative of the Chinese CDC. And unless it's global and we get it early, we're going to be screwed, basically is what she was saying, and he was nodding along to it.
The likely route of transmission is, and move very quickly to secure supplies and distribute supplies according to whatever epidemiological protocol and based on what Steve says, as we know, we already know some things about the transmission of this disease. But unless we do that whilst doing what we can do on vaccine, I agree, we will have this get out of control.
Okay, Tim. We'll go down the line.
It's important, and it's fantastic to have this information in front of us, because if you look across the countries, you've got very different patterns already. Chile seems to have a 3% case fatality rate.
World Bank Group.
Ecuador, 5%. So what's going on there, and are there lessons in terms of how...
Timothy Evans. Okay, let's see who Tim Evans is. Tim Evans, Senior Director of Health, Nutrition, and Population of the World Bank. Health, Nutrition, and Population. Senior Director, blah, 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 from 2010 to 2013. He was the Dean of the James P. Grant School of Public Health at BRAC University in Dhaka, Bangladesh, and a senior advisor to the BRAC Health Program for 2000. He was an assistant director general at the WHO. Again, we've got another WHO guy here. Prior to this, he served as director of health equity theme at the Rockefeller Foundation. Earlier in his career, he was an attending physician of internal medicine at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. And now, again, Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, they are the designer of the COVID protocols that I've been sharing that actually included regimens of hydroxychloroquine in them, and even the dosages to take, which is interesting, isn't it? He was the assistant professor in international health economics at the Harvard School of Public Health. He is a board member of a number of international health alliances, yada, yada, yada. What I think is also kind of interesting, the Global Alliance on Vaccines and Immunization. Efforts to increase access to HIV treatment for mothers and innovative approaches. Also, let's see. He received his medical degree from McMaster University, was research and internal medicine resident at Brigham and Women's Hospital. He earned DPhil in agricultural economics from University of Oxford, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. If you guys know anything about Rhodes Scholars. That's a whole nother discussion. Cecil Rhodes, Rhodes Scholars. You can look all that up.
How they're managing the outbreak, which might inform ways in which you're going to decrease the need for scarce resources. Are they more effective in their supportive treatment, or what is it that's explaining what look to be significantly different patterns in the outbreak of the epidemic? The second point is that these are all middle-income countries or high-income countries, and as Jane mentioned, low-income countries are either their surveillance systems aren't sensitive enough to detect cases that are already there,
Are they, though, in South America?
or are worried that, in fact, they will be at the bottom of the food chain. And in this respect, the World Bank would probably be proactively moving into exercising what we call a CIRC, which is a contingency emergency response component to existing loans to low and middle income countries, in which.
Okay, so this is the financial component. This is the part where they rob treasuries and they rob taxpayers from around the world in developed nations, and they basically make this giant pool of money that they can then rob from themselves, just like sharks taking pieces of a school of fish away before the fish actually make it to their destination. Now, some will make it to their destination because you can't have no money showing up to the destination, but it's going to be probably significantly less than it would have been had people just given individually to private organizations that would then go and do humanitarian efforts some way that didn't involve, a world body like the World Bank.
They can repurpose those loans for these types of emergencies. So I think on the financing side, the CIRCs, which are built into every loan made by the bank, could be exercised in such a way that you don't have the problem of the lack of resources being the problem.
What's a CIRC? What's a CIRC? What's he talking about? CIRC loan. Let's see. It didn't really tell me. We'll look that up later. Maybe it's something else.
Primary constraint for the purchase of those scarce commodities.
Okay, Latoya?
I agree, because financially, that's one of the things we have to look at. We have to have the financial means to start production, mass production, and getting companies on board. It's about buy-in and having an understanding of where we're moving forward with this disease process, how quickly and rapidly it's proliferating, and also.
What is she? Who is she? Latova Abbott, right? Event 201. Who is this person? It's interesting that all these are coming up because other people are looking them up too. Biography of Latova D. Abbott, participant in Event 201. She is the Senior Director of Global Occupational Health Services for Marriott International. She has over 20 years of experience as a nurse practitioner, educator, and senior leader. She has worked in a multitude of settings. Yada, yada. Let's see. So basically, she runs a flu clinic. Of course, she's from Washington. Of course, she's in Washington. Where else would she be? She holds a BS in nursing and a BA in psychology from Winston-Salem. A doctorate in nursing practice. Yeah, something tells me she's a little bit more on the periphery of this. That she probably doesn't know a whole lot.
So utilizing the materials that we do know, like the protective equipment that we already have. We know it's airborne, so ensuring that companies that are manufacturing these products have the financial ability to be able to do such. So that way, even if we are in the process of continuing to develop this drug, there is some type of protection that's going on to the lower company.
Great. So I'm going to keep going down the line, but just in terms of the initial reactions, do we think, as Adrian suggested, that there should be some kind of international resource?
Sorry, I kind of missed what she said. Sorry.
Financing side, the CERCs, which are built into every loan made by the bank, could be exercised in such a way that you don't have the problem of the lack of resources being the primary constraint for the purchase of those scarce commodities.
Okay, Latoya?
I agree, because financially, that's one of the things we'll have to look at. We have to have the financial means to start production, mass production, and getting companies on board. It's about buy-in and having an understanding of where we're moving forward with this disease process, how quickly and rapidly it's proliferating, and also utilizing the materials that we do know, like the protective equipment that we already have. We know it's airborne, so ensuring that companies that are manufacturing these products have the financial ability to be able to do such. So that way, even if we are in the process of continuing to develop this drug, there is some type of protection that's going on to the lower company.
Great. So I'm going to keep going down the line, but just in terms of the initial reactions, do we think, as Adrian suggested, that there should be some kind of international resource or distribution method, or really is this going to be every country for itself doing what it can to procure N95 masks, antivirals for
Of course we know
itself?
what they're going to
And
say
so just
to that.
think about that as you're making your comments. Yeah.
Well, I do think that there needs to be sort of an honest broker, a centralized command and control organization that really brings together the public-private sector, both on a global approach and also on a local approach, because we can't forget that transparency and communications at the local level are going to be critical in the to stop the continued spread. But I do think there needs to be some form of centralized approach to really organize all the various efforts that are going to be undertaken.
Okay, I think a lot of people want to get in here. We'll go around the table. Martin, Sophia, Chris, and then George.
Thank you. I fully support the centralized approach in this state we have already, if it comes also to global distribution of any products. And I would like to go back to Stephen's first statement. We had parallel to this, we should really focus on how this spread could be controlled better or easily. If I talk about logistics for globally distributed topics, we need to protect the staff that is responsible for this. If they don't protect it, they won't do this. And then the entire chain breaks apart within no days. So we really have to do it both parallel to find out possible ways to protect the people that are in chain for this, and it should be centralized, organized, otherwise it will not work.
So you're saying that the people who are delivering these medicines and moving them around the world, they should be protected by these medicines with N95?
I mean, there's basic protection anyway in a phase like this, but we should enlarge this with the newest information we have about the spreading. Only with this we can guarantee that any distribution is possible at all.
Okay, Sophia?
Thank you. Yes, I agree. And I wanted to speak to the point about having the honest broker. And I think in this regard, the United Nations fits the bill. I think that given that the countries most affected are those that are low and middle income countries with unequal access to technology, to finances, the UN has a worldwide footprint, universally recognized, and universal membership. And I think taking the example of the Ebola crisis last round, when a trust fund was established, and calling on member states who are capable of contributing to that trust fund in order to help those that are least capable, the low and middle income countries. Thank you.
Chris?
Thanks, Tom. I want to agree with a couple of the comments. One is about the need to prioritize for the frontline health workers, the basic people to keep the system working. I think it's important to recognize that we have the data that you're showing because of some remarkable international collaboration about sharing information in real time about the patterns of disease. And that's come out of the international health regulations, and that's a good first step. If we're now going to try to prioritize the allocation of scarce commodities, having this kind of dashboard to know where those masks and drugs are and to get at some of the psychology that's behind some of the hoarding. People may be making bad decisions because they think it's more scarce than it actually is. So if we could have the equivalent of this dashboard to understand where the supplies are to map to the needs, a global stockpile would certainly help ensure more rational and strategic allocation. But the reality is that we don't have the logistics capability, even within the UN, to bring that together in one place and run it. So this is where I think a collaboration between the international organizations like the World Health Organization and the private sector, which runs these supply chains for many purposes every day, understand where the supplies are, make smart decisions about how to allocate them to the people who need them in the places that need them the most, and then work with the industry to move those supplies from where they are today to where they need to be.
On your point of transparency and data about where supplies are, where medicines are, where N95 masks are.
What's funny about that is, I mean, it's so freaking obvious, but you're really saying a whole lot of nothing right there. It's just, well, what exactly is he saying? Oh, we need to work from a central organization. Needs to basically tell the private sector where to send masks. I mean, yeah, that's what we need to do. That's a great idea. Let's do that. I mean, that's just like, it's almost like he's playing a game or something. It's like he's playing Risk and he's just moving pieces around a board. The real world doesn't really work like that. And there's just absolutely no attention there paid or given to, pushback that might happen or from these suppliers, or the actual market value of the items so far. I mean, he's basically just saying a lot of nothing. He just, all he did really there was agree that they need central planning.
I couldn't agree more. We've been unable to find that data, so I think it's an important need that you just surfaced. George?
Yes, I would support for the proposal, centralized, coordinated effort, not just nationally, also internationally. At such a situation, that's very, very, very important. And when you read all this about the epi data, R0 is 2. It's relatively, you can see the number is there. Especially when you are talking about some country like China or any countries who have the largest population of swine, pig production. So if the virus yet still, transmitted from pig still in the cycle, so that could be very serious. So we have to prioritize. So maybe the farmers or whoever have access to it. So that's very, very important to have the expert to assess the possibility. You see the R0, but you also see it's swine origin. I will still have some new virus from swine, from pigs, or the virus already circulating in the human beings. That's also, we should put that into account for the strategy for the allocation of the actual winner. And also I got the information from my staff, looks like, of course, we have capacity to produce the extra number, but even, think about the population we have. We can't expand our capacity, but, what we have, even not enough for our own population.
Tom?
That's the question we should think.
Yes.
I think it's important in 2019 to remember that in 2016, the World Economic Forum, together with the World Food Program, presented a global supply chain management approach for this exact scenario. And what might be helpful, given that everybody suffers from short-term memory deficit, is to have an emergency briefing on those resources that are global public goods that are there to facilitate supply chain management and where those can be deployed. But also CEPI, which was established 3 years ago to accelerate vaccines exactly in development in these settings where a coronavirus is, in fact, one of its indications and first areas of focus. That may not be common knowledge.
So he's saying, 3 years even before this point. So what, that in 2016, CEPI, what's CEPI? CEPI coronavirus. What he said, CEPI, right? Maybe it's CEP. Maybe that's it. CEPI. What's this? Sorry about all the background noise. My 4-year-old doesn't know how to stop screaming. So, whatever. CEPI's vaccine and R&D team. What is this? What is this? COVID-19 vaccine development landscape. CEPI. Research by CEPI's vaccine R&D team published in Nature Reviews. Drug Discovery has identified 115 COVID-19 vaccines in development. Jesus, that's going to be a fucking clusterfuck. You know what's going to end up having to happen there? They're going to have to pay all 115 companies. That's what they're going to do. That's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to use the money from the World Bank and, U.S. sources or whatever. It's basically, it's going to come from the world's taxpayers, the world's poorest people, the middle class of the world is going to pay 115 companies to all go out and try to develop a vaccine. So even if they don't win or get over the finish line first, there will be consolation prizes for all of them. Otherwise, there would be very little incentive to go into a race with 115 other participants if you didn't have a reasonable reasonable expectation of coming out of it with some kind of money, right? You wouldn't enter a strongman competition against 115 people who were just as big as you or stronger than you in a lot of cases if you didn't know there were consolation prizes, all the way down to maybe 12th place or whatever. If you didn't have some kind of consolation waiting for you, a prospect of that. And that's exactly what they're going to do, isn't it? That's exactly what they're going to do. From February 2020 onwards, the team studied the landscape of COVID-19 vaccine candidates by using internal and external data sources, including vaccine development programs reported through the WHO's authoritative and continually updated list, information from calls for proposals, and direct communications with vaccine developers and partners. So they're basically just calling people. So people can just call in and say, oh, we're developing a vaccine. And basically that's, you're on the list of clinics or whatever, or universities that are developing a vaccine. So basically that puts you in the running for the money at the end. That's what it sounds like to me. So you might get some sort of compensation. Exploratory. Confirmed exploratory. We got exploratory unconfirmed numbers of projects. We have preclinical trials, and we have phase 1. I'm presuming that's already in trials. Okay. Wide range of vaccine technology being tested. 115 vaccine candidates are in varying stages of development. Study showed, including traditional and novel approaches. Most of the active projects are in exploratory preclinical stages. 5 candidates have recently moved into clinical development, including mRNA 1273, Moderna. So these companies are leading the pack. We've got Moderna, we have CanSino Biologicals, we have Inovio, and we have this one, Shenzhen Geno Immune Medical Institute, which is obviously in China. So, Moderna. Fauci singles out Moderna's coronavirus vaccine as reason for optimism. So Fauci is touting Moderna. So he is with them. Probably no coincidence that they're listed first also among this list. Who is CanSino Biologicals? You know, I mean, obviously you probably never heard of these people either, but obviously the people who have investments with them will have heard of them. These are headquartered in China. So basically it's a Chinese communist company, right? Founded in 2009. It filed an application to list on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, debuted in 2000. It debuted on March the 28th of last year, of 2019, with an increase of 59% since. So sounds like they're doing well. Okay, so they do have investors. What's STID Fund Management? It's a state-owned investment holding, that one. This one is American Pharmaceutical Company. Oh, that's Eli Lilly. Okay, Eli Lilly owns some of their stock. So Eli Lilly, I wouldn't put anything past them too. Obviously they're going to be there at the finish line, I'm sure. Inovio, let's see. And of course, the reason I'm bringing this up and I'm harping on this is because obviously part of the end game here is to sell us all on a vaccine. They are not going to let this go unless they can somebody is going to be able to bring a vaccine to market and either force it on people, so force vaccinations, or be voluntary vaccinations, one of the two. But it probably won't matter because they'll scare enough people into taking it. So they'll make money either way. Inovio Pharmaceuticals, headquartered in Pennsylvania, Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania. Dr. Joseph Kim. Is he Chinese? Joseph Kim? I mean, is he personally Chinese? I don't know. But he's the CEO. So I mean that could very easily be a Chinese front company too, if he's from China. That's quite possible. This one, Shenzhen. So it's looking like we've got China versus the U.S., and there's more China companies than U.S. companies, and the U.S. companies even have one guy who's Chinese running the show, possibly. Again, possibly, I'm not sure. This one is founded by the Shenzhen government in 2015 and come into construction in 2016. So this one's very recent. Man, it seems like a lot of new companies just spring up and just, we're doing this. We're doing this vaccine thing, right? Just in time. The research team consists of experienced scientists, yada, yada, yada. Dr. Longji Chang. Okay. Genetic diseases. You're seeing this for the first time along with me, most likely, so we can all read this. But those are the companies that are in the running that are furthest along, it looks like. The lead developers, 56 of 78 confirmed active vaccine are being developed by private, and 28% of the projects are led by academic, public sector, or other not-for-profit organizations. I guess they're including government-owned with that. Many of the lead developers were identified as small or inexperienced in large-scale vaccine manufacture. So that's how they're going to reward the other ones, is when any of them develop the vaccine, they'll all get a share of the production. So, they'll all get a piece of the pie eventually. Geographical distribution of the confirmed active vaccine candidates, 36 or 46% of the developers are in North America. 18% are in China. But isn't it neat that those Chinese were at the finish line, even though they only have 18% of the total in the total running. 18% in Asia, excluding China, and Australia also, and 14 or 18% of those in Europe. And here we go. The authors of this paper stress that strong international coordination and cooperation among vaccine developers, regulators, policymakers, funders, public health bodies, and governments will be needed to ensure a safe transfer of money from all your treasuries into the pockets of big pharma. For an effective vaccine can be manufactured in sufficient quantities. So yeah, that's essentially what they're going to do. Whoever crosses the finish line first will probably, they'll get their bonus check basically, and then everybody else who finishes second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, they're going to get consolation prizes, of being able to help manufacture the new vaccine, right? That's what it sounds like. So, and I say all this very, very cynically because, I have suspected for a few weeks now that this is what is going on, and it's, and to be quite honest, it's starting to weigh on me, a bit. Just seeing the way that this is being done. But, Event 201, stuff like this, just kind of drives it home. I mean, they actually had sat down and gone over this of what it would be like beforehand. They practiced. Basically, it's just a practice. It's like Dungeons and Dragons. They've gone in and they've practiced this before they went in to slay the real dragon, or the real dragon in real time in the real world. So they had some idea of what, everybody being on the same page.
Likewise, on the financing, there is global financing. The criteria identified here would be triggers for the Pandemic Emergency Financing Facility, which would disperse a significant amount of money into that international pool on the basis of this trajectory of the epidemic. So those are resources that may not be well understood amongst the set of players that would appreciate having some understanding. So an emergency briefing on those resources, I think, might make sure that they're not overlooked.
Hasti, and then Matt.
So a couple of things. First of all, the patients who are currently on Extranavir need to receive different medication. So I think this is something that the team needs to look into. How do we make sure that we have the right resources to make sure that they're not being panicked and we're not causing panic with them, and that we're having to use this drug for a different use at this time. Secondly, I think it's very important that we make sure that there is concise communication with all healthcare facilities where these patients are being treated so that there isn't mass panic. And perhaps a member of this team could be part of that task force to ensure that whether it's in the news, by social media, or to these hospitals, we have the
news, social media, try to avoid mass panic within a certain group. So basically what she's talking about there is generating news, basically psychological operations, targeted at a certain subset of the population so that they don't panic when they realize that somebody's going to take away their HIV medication and put them on something else so that they can take those medications and give them to this new, patients for this new virus. And the problem with remdesivir is that they're going to be doing that to HIV patients. whereas with hydroxychloroquine, I mean, granted, the hydroxychloroquine also, it also treats some serious ailments itself. It's lupus is nothing to shake a stick at, and neither is malaria. But at the same time, it's a little bit different. It's not exactly the same. I mean, you can live, I think, with other things, but it's interesting to me that they're talking about that, and I wonder if they've done that in the real world. I wonder if they have started. I wonder if they've started this. Well, I say misinformation campaign. They started the psychological operation to basically quell people with HIV. Let's talk about this. Let's see. People with HIV fear remdesivir. Let's just try that. Gilead eases HIV supply chain fears as, look at that. Let's see. How do COVID-19 fears affect people living with HIV? All right, here we go. Corona. Here we go. New York Times. Come on, New York Times. Do something for us here. Starting with remdesivir, an antiviral drug. Many drugs we believed were fantastic ended up killing people, he said in an interview. And MERS, coronavirus, HIV. Here we go. Here's your National Institute of Health, NIH clinical trial. Oh, it's remdesivir is so great. And we did a trial for hydroxychloroquine, and it was hydroxychloroquine, remdesivir. They had a 31% faster time to recover than those who received the placebo. That's amazing, especially considering the people who got hydroxychloroquine early on and their sickness recovered at the rate of like 90 and 97% in the trials that I've seen. Here we go. Foreign policy. HIV positive people face coronavirus fears. Oh, look at this. I mean, this is way back on February 25th. Remdesivir. Gilead Sciences drug remdesivir may help treat coronavirus symptoms, according to the WHO. The WHO's behind it. It can't be bad. The WHO's behind it, guys. Does Bill Gates own? I'll tell you what. It's either Bill Gates or it's his buddy from Berkshire Hathaway. It's Buffett. One of those two guys has got to own some stock in Gilead. Let's see. Gilead stock. Bill Gates. How much stock in Gilead does Bill Gates own? Let's see. Let's see. Gilead Sciences is the leading corporate global funder of HIV/AIDS programs and second overall behind Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Bill Gates pitches in on coronavirus R&D with $100 million. Did he give that to Gilead? Did Did he give that to Gilead? Gates Foundation has signed up to take a role. Let's see. During pandemic. Wait, what's the date on this? Oh, this is back in February. Jeez. But I'm not surprised. This is about the time he stepped down from Microsoft, isn't it? Or this is about a week or so later after that. Prepared to spend $100 million to help spur R&D into vaccines, diagnosis, therapies. Multilateral organizations, blah, blah, blah. Where's Gilead? A host of players. This is going to take all of us. We're all going to have to pull together on this one, guys. And steal from the middle class. Regeneron was one of the most recent companies to jump in alongside Moderna. Yep, there they are. Vir and CureVac, as many others. Gilead has been in the spotlight as well with its experimental antiviral. But in this situation where developmental barriers are steep and the demand is sky high, it remains uncertain how fast therapies and vaccines can be developed and how effective they could prove to be. See, what you have basically is you have the people who are sitting on these, who are sitting on some of these treatments, and if there's a big enough wallet behind the treatment, they're getting pushed up into the news because they have, basically they can buy the ads, and it's not ads, it's the stories. The stories are ads. The stories are the ads. It's it's like this, this was a video that was removed from YouTube for violating guidelines. And what it was originally, and I didn't get to see it before it was pulled, but somebody had linked me previously, and I just didn't see it until now. But it was supposed to be a hospital that was one of the hospitals that they keep telling us is full and packed and people dying, blah, blah, blah. And this video was showing what it's really like when there are no cameras around. You guys may have seen the brand new report from Project Veritas. If you look it up, you'll see it. But Project Veritas, in their newest video, they basically showed where CBS in Michigan was faking a report. Some guy came forward and said that they faked this one right here, Expose CBS. They faked this report in Michigan. I guess it's all three of these. I only saw one of them. Where these people were in line to get a test, and the news, CBS, basically was there, so they got all these people to go stand in line for a test, even though they weren't going to get the test. They just wanted them to stand in line so they could get a nice picture of everybody being busy and stuff happening. It's basically faking the news. It's fake, literally fake news. Fake. Not just standing back and being a impartial observer to the happenings, but actively participating in faking what's going on. So, anyway, it would be interesting to see what ties Bill Gates really has to Gilead, but I suspect in this case it could be just a case of Gilead is big enough that they can throw their weight around, and they're going to have to cooperate. See, Gilead's basically going to Gates and all these other people, and Fauci and all the people who are in on this, Johns Hopkins people and all of them, they're having to get together on this and saying, okay, well, you take this cut, we'll take this cut. This is very Machiavellian shit that's going on, I'm sure, behind closed doors with Moderna and all these other companies. So I wonder how long until this video gets pulled, or my whole channel gets pulled. Anyway, back to Event 201. Let's finish this up.
The right communications channel to be able to make sure that the public does not have mass panic.
Thanks, Matt.
I was just going to, I'll add to that in as much as the value of a centralized convening body
that is addressing both the production and supply chain also serves as a convening enterprise around the communications. Because there is a lot of great data that's been collected, but probably more can be done from a public education perspective around containment, prevention, while the supply chain is managed.
Yvonne?
I just want to echo Matt's point, and my question here is, what's happening around the world? While we know that there are cases here in these few countries, what's happening to the rest of Asia? What are governments doing to assure the people? And this will help to relax some of the stress that you see in terms of people hoarding personal protection equipment. So I think it requires a global coordination and not just at the individual country-specific level.
Yeah, Brad?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on Christopher's scarcity comment. It's not just scarcity, it's also severity, and that's why we see different rates of fatalities, 5% to 3%. And there seems to be a stakeholder maybe missing here, and I may be wrong, but is the provider and who's taking care of these patients. Because there's definitely discrepancy.
I want to hear what he has to say, but let's see who he is. It's funny that this is the biggest thing they've ever participated in. It's tops on Google. I guess because other people are searching for it and clicking on this, so it pushes it to the top. Mr. Conant joined Henry Schein Incorporated in 1997. Serves as the president of Henry Schein's U.S. Medical Group, one of the nation's leading providers of products and services to physician offices, urgent care clinics, retail clinics, freestanding emergency rooms, integrated delivery networks, ambulatory surgery centers, and other alternate care sites. He's a member of the company's executive management committee. So he would know something, I guess, about this distribution of PPE, probably. Okay, including sales, marketing, operations, business development, technology solutions. Huh?
Here on fatality rates. We know in panic, in psychology of panic, people start hoarding. People start freaking out and wondering, what should I do? And then countries start doing it, and then there's all kinds of dysfunctional decisions made. Providers really need to be at the table talking about how they're taking care of the patients and diagnostics and what they're doing with it, because we're jumping to a little bit of a conclusion that this is going to spread everywhere to the same degree. And this leads to hoarding. And I'll share with you in SARS, N95s, there's still N95s sitting in boxes that were never used. I mean, the hoarding of that was atrocious. I mean, and then there were knockoffs of N95s that really weren't truly impervious masks that were made and then distributed. So I think there's a need to have the providers in the discussion to see really what they're doing to treat the patients. How severe is the epidemic?
And of course, all that same stuff has happened again. But it seems like the toilet paper hoarding was the thing that got the most press. So it was almost like that was a psychological operation to try to focus people on hoarding paper products. It's like, if you're going to hoard something, this is what you got to hoard, because this is what everybody's hoarding is paper products. Even though we're basically going to say it's foolish and that it's not a big deal and everybody needs to calm down. Oh, just calm down, everybody. Don't hoard toilet paper. And we all even made fun of it. But all that did was it encouraged people to go hoard it anyway, because, I'm going to run out of toilet paper. And that diverted their focus away from the things they probably really should have been hoarding if they wanted to, if they were all about self-preservation, But funny.
Just on severity, it's important for you all to know that the estimate from our team and from other ministries of health is that the distinctions in case fatality rate represent distinctions in data collection, not that the disease is any different. It looks like the virus is the same around the world. These are different healthcare systems, different data collection, different surveillance. So overall, our all-in case fatality rate is somewhere in the order of 7% to 10%. It depends on where we are.
Okay, so he's saying, oh, it could be 7% to 10%. So he kind of clarified the numbers there that I was questioning earlier. You'll recall I said, 2,000 out of 30,000 dead does not equal 10%. So where are they getting that? And that he's I guess clarifying that around the world they're going to have different data collection, and it's not going to all be the same everywhere. So he even acknowledged right here in the Event 201, in the plan for what's going on, in the simulation, that the data collection is not going to be the same everywhere, and that's going to be the cause of a lot of discrepancies in data reporting.
In the world, and in terms of where the disease is in the world, we see lots of blank spots, and we think that's partly or largely due to surveillance systems and the slowness in collecting this data in certain parts of the world. We expect that to come online quickly.
Absolutely.
Steve, and then Avril, you haven't had a chance.
Steve.
Go ahead, I think you haven't had a chance.
Okay, sure. I mean, I think it's just in terms of the precise question being asked, it's clear that having everybody go on their own is not going to be the most effective answer, right? So I absolutely agree with the comments that have been made that we need to have some kind of international mechanism for coordinating what it is that we would be doing, also for collecting information, also for understanding what the resources are that are available through international mechanisms to execute on that allocation and coordination. I think it's challenging to set it up in a way that says that international mechanism has to be the body that decides in all circumstances what the allocation is. In other words, I think states are going to want to be able to decide for themselves on, in some circumstances, some of the issues that are relevant. So one of the challenges will be ensuring that you're using an existing mechanism, and I think Sophia's right about the UN as being sort of the base of operations in a sense, both for the funding but also for a whole series of other issues that you would be looking at for allocation, coordination, et cetera. But then making sure that states are stepping up to actually tell people what it is that they're doing, what their decisions are in that context, and creating transparency about what the proper allocation should be for containing this issue so that there can be pressure put to bear on ensuring that states are actually doing what the larger plan needs to be in that.
So essentially what she's saying there is the U.S., because she's a former national security advisor, she's saying, oh, the U.S. wouldn't be comfortable with giving up sovereignty unless it was to the UN. Then it's okay. It's the UN. We could sell the UN to people, but we probably couldn't sell very much, anything else.
In that context.
Can I ask a follow-up question? If there is a centralized stockpile developed, either at the WHO or perhaps somewhere else in the UN system, if you were going to suggest that, or some other entity, how much can you imagine states contributing of the supplies that are being made in their own countries? Is this a 1% allocation, 20% of the supply that they're making? We've already heard from George that China's not making nearly enough medication to take care of China at this point. So what is the desired end state here? Can you, from a state security perspective, if someone who's worked at the top of government, what do you imagine states who have this medication doing?
I mean, I think the percentage will depend on the details, right? And what it is that you're capable of actually producing in the context of the particular crisis. And I don't know how much we're able to produce under this circumstance. I think there should be, and there would be, from a public perspective and a public health perspective, right, enormous interest in promoting an allocation to international efforts that would actually contain the issue as quickly as possible, right? And that should be the focus for everybody in the sense that that's what's going to actually help you prevent the downstream impact of what the trajectory holds for us. So the question is, can you, through this international mechanism, really promote commitments to doing this as quickly as possible and give people a sense that actually if they contribute more, that they will have a better chance of protecting their own populations and the country's security.
Most likely.
Another number of comments. You all just jump in.
So thank you. So to be completely clear, most of this production would already be committed in contracts.
Yes.
It is almost unheard of that people are producing product without having a forward commitment for the consumption of that product. So the first thing that needs to be done, because this is not something that the countries currently control, unless countries are going to bring about emergency situations and co-opt an existing supply chain. So the first thing to do is to figure out where that's going. Now, in H1N1, in a number of cases, so the Australian government, we bought vaccine to the extent we could get it, and in some instances we actually gave some of that vaccine. We actually gave some of that vaccine to the United States, who actually ended up with a supply shortage at that particular point. So inconsistent with working out where the biggest vulnerabilities are, the first thing you need to do is figure out who's got control of those supply chains and those products, and then figure out where, for the greater global good, it should be deployed. But we need to be clear. Any government who says, I'm going to ship every single dose of a particular product offshore is going to end up with a challenge domestically. Mm-hmm. So giving governments the capacity to manage both their domestic concerns together with being good players. And we know from the PIP framework that companies will similarly contribute, but it's got to be in an organised framework.
Okay.
And that challenge, I think, is being proved out with the increasing rhetoric, both by candidates in the US, UK, and Germany, who are saying that globalism is responsible for this pandemic, and therefore there's a rising protectionist nature to take care of their own. And so I think it's an instance where the business, health, and scientific communities need to combat that rising rhetoric and misleading information.
Information. Last couple of comments here. We have about 2 minutes before we have to close.
So I think one thing that's going to be very important is to define the aim of using the countermeasure. And from what we know right now, it doesn't seem likely from the data we've had presented that this countermeasure is going to suppress transmission, is going to lead to containment. So our aim really would be to minimize the severity and to prevent death rather than to prevent this emerging pandemic. Second thing I wanted to say is just how important.
What he's saying right there, once again, this is the second time he's talked, I think, during this, and both times he has come back to measures that will, basically he's talking, without saying it explicitly, he's talking about the shutdown. He's talking about shutting down the economy, keeping people home, educating people on washing hands and all this crap, and scaring them basically into staying home, so that it flattens the curve. That's the thing that, that's the trip he's on with that.
Important communication is, and that is true to the public. This is a very alarming situation, and I think public communication shouldn't be alarming, but should be truthful about how severe it is. I think also internally, as negotiations are going on to share countermeasures, I think it's not likely. I agree that countries are not going to buy a countermeasure to put into a global supply without retaining a large portion of it for themselves. The last thing I'd say is this is a very dynamic situation. Countries will be negotiating with manufacturers, and I think that's got to be figured into whatever agreement is reached. And whatever that sharing agreement is, it won't be perfect, and I think it's just got to be done quickly so that sharing can actually take place rather than trying to get something that's exactly the way everyone wants it.
And do you think that governments are going to need to break contracts, have companies break contracts in order to redirect antivirals?
I think that would work best for the countries to make the decisions with the countermeasures that they purchased.
Okay.
I think that's a very, we're not talking about one supply chain, but we're multiple supply chains here. And I think, before we start talking about companies withdrawing antiretrovirals from patients with HIV who have a disease, we need to really understand how those ARVs will be used in patients who may or may not have a disease. So demand forecasting will be critical. And I also want to point out, it's not just the healthcare workers. We have supply chains in middle-income countries. Often those are very resource dense, people in small spaces producing masks. We have to think about the integrity and the health of the supply chain.
Okay.
Going back
Yes.
to Stephen's note real quick about the public communication, my team has been monitoring the public response, and on various social media channels and cable networks, there's been some conspiracy theories that are around about the potential that pharmaceutical companies or the UN have released this for their own benefit. So as we move forward, obviously trust in pharmaceuticals and government is very important at this moment. And so as we move forward with developing the right scenarios, we have to make sure that the public communication is a major part of that because of these conspiracy theories.
Thank you. We have to close.
Because of the conspiracy theories, you can't do anything about the conspiracy theories except for suppress them on social media and in the TV media. That's all you can really do. So that's what she's really talking about there is suppression.
We have 30 seconds.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
Mark.
this fully supports Steve's input. We should not search for the perfect solution right now.
Yeah.
We run against time. And if conspiracy theories like this come up already, so we are on the edge of hysterical reactions, and then it gets out of control. And that's the thing what should be the main driver for us now to find...
You see, that's the thing. The conspiracy theories are the opposite. They are calling for anti-hysterical reactions. They're calling for, hey, everybody calm the fuck down, go back to work, stop being stupid. Whereas the hysterical reactions are coming from the other side. So, we're an upside-down world.
Find a solution.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to bring these recommendations together and communicate them broadly at the conclusion of this meeting. Thank you all for your input. We will conclude this meeting.
Okay, so that's the end of part 1. That's segment 1 of event 201. Very long, I know. Thank you guys for sticking around through this segment. I may go through these other segments as well. You're absolutely very honestly welcome to go through them yourselves. Make videos yourselves reacting to the remaining segments. It should be very interesting. Hey. Shh, I'm talking. I'm making a video. Okay? No, I didn't make it. Someone sent it to you. Someone sent it to you. You like it? Awesome. So yeah, thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's a long video. I almost fell asleep at some points myself listening to these people, but it's something that needs to be done. We need to see what these guys are thinking. By the time you get to the end of it, I'm sure we're going to be into the future. Right now, we're looking back into the past, so we're able to kind of contrast what's being said with what has already happened in this real world scenario. That's pretty much a direct mirror of this simulation. But further down the road in this simulation, we should get to the point where we're at the present and even then into the future, which should be pretty enlightening. So yeah, stick around possibly for future segments of that. And for now, we will see y'all later. Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Dad, did someone